Welcome to Audiobook Quiver. Are you ready for another in-depth summary and review? Today we're going to be talking about Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor.
I think what really sets this book apart is how it takes something we do constantly, like tens of thousands of times a day, breathing, and it makes you realize, wow, I might be doing this totally wrong.
Yeah, no, for me reading this, it really opened my eyes to how much I'd taken breathing for granted.
Absolutely. And Nestor doesn't just scratch the surface. He goes really deep into how changing the way you breathe can actually impact your health, athletic performance, just overall well-being.
You're right, it's not just about getting more air into your lungs. There's a whole art to it.
There really is. And Nestor blends his own personal journey with historical research going back thousands of years, and then ties it all together with modern science to present this idea that breathing is a lost art that we need to rediscover.
So let's unpack some of the most surprising stuff he talks about and look at the evidence he uses to back it up.
Well, right off the bat, Nestor hooks you with his own initial foray into the world of breathwork. He describes going to a free session held in, of all places, a Victorian home. At first, he wasn't that impressed, but it ends up triggering this significant shift in his thinking about breathing.
It's amazing how often those seemingly insignificant experiences lead to the biggest changes in our lives.
It really is. And from that personal starting point, Nestor zooms out to ask this big fundamental question. How has our modern lifestyle actually messed up our breathing?
Right, because we think of breathing as this automatic thing, like we
Yeah,
just do it, right?
exactly. But he makes this really compelling case that humans might be the most plugged up species on Earth.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, but it's not just hyperbole. Nestor talks about his own experience getting an X-ray from a Dr. Jai Karnayak, and the X-ray shows that he has a deviated septum and a really blocked nostril. This personal anecdote sets the stage for understanding how many of us might be struggling with similar issues.
It definitely makes you stop and think about your own breathing for a minute.
It does. And it leads to one of the most, I guess you could say, visceral parts of the book.
You're talking about the 10-day experiment he does with Anders Olsen, where they force themselves to breathe only through their mouths.
Exactly. They literally blocked their noses and committed to mouth breathing for 10 days. And the results were pretty dramatic.
What happened?
Well, within the first 24 hours, Nestor's snoring went up by like 1,300%, and his sleep apnea events quadrupled.
Whoa.
Olson, who didn't snore before the experiment, started snoring for over 4 hours every night.
That's crazy. You'd think a few days of mouth breathing wouldn't have such a huge effect.
I know, it's pretty wild. But that dramatic increase in snoring and sleep apnea in such a short time really highlights how sensitive our bodies are to changes in how we breathe.
Makes you think about all those times you wake up with a dry mouth and wonder why.
For sure. It raises the question of what our default breathing mode should actually be. And that takes us into the evolutionary history part of the book, which I found super interesting.
Yeah, he goes way back to explore how human breathing has evolved over time.
Exactly. He digs into the anatomy, comparing skulls of early humans, like the Parsi skull, which was studied by Mariana Evans.
What do those ancient skulls tell us?
They show that our ancestors had much larger nasal openings and more prominent jaws than modern humans.
So they were better breathers, right?
In a lot of ways, yes. Their whole physical structure was set up for more efficient breathing.
And then what happened? Why did our breathing change?
Well, Nestor explains how the development of speech played a major role.
That seems counterintuitive. How does talking affect breathing?
To produce a wider range of sounds, our larynx had to lower. This was great for communication, but not so great for breathing.
In what way?
It made our airways less efficient and actually increased our chances of choking.
Oh, wow. So there was a trade-off. Better communication, but at the expense of easier breathing.
Precisely. And then there's another big shift around 1500 AD when we start eating softer, more processed foods.
Ah, the dawn of the soft food era.
Right. And that shift is linked to the narrowing of our jaws, which then leads to crooked teeth and more breathing problems.
It's like we traded strong jaws and good breathing for convenience.
Kind of, yeah. Nestor brings up Weston Price's research on isolated populations that still eat traditional diets.
Those are the groups that eat tougher, unprocessed foods.
Exactly. And they have much wider faces and straighter teeth, suggesting a strong link between diet, facial development, and breathing.
Makes you think twice about all the soft, mushy food we eat.
It really does. So, having laid out all the ways our breathing might be messed up, Nestor then dives into the importance of doing it right. He starts with the nose.
Okay, so what's so special about breathing through your nose?
Well, he goes into detail about the nose's role in filtering, warming, and humidifying the air we breathe.
Right, that's basic biology.
Yeah. It is, but then he goes beyond that, exploring some really unexpected connections.
Like what?
Well, for instance, did you know that nasal breathing is linked to erectile dysfunction?
Wait, what? How is that even possible?
It's because the nose plays a role in releasing nitric oxide, which is a molecule that helps widen blood vessels. This improved blood flow is crucial for, well, everything working properly down there.
So mouth breathing could actually contribute to those kinds of problems.
It's a possibility, according to Nestor. It just goes to show how something as simple as how you breathe can have these ripple effects throughout your body.
Mind-blowing. Okay, what about the whole thing with one nostril being more open than the other? Is there actually a purpose to that?
Absolutely. That's called the nasal cycle, and it's not random at all. Nestor talks about this guy, Richard Kaiser, who studied it back in 1895.
Wow, that's a long time ago.
I know, right? Anyway, Kaiser discovered that these nasal cycles are linked to our autonomic nervous system.
Okay, refresh my memory. What's the autonomic nervous system again?
It's the system that controls all the stuff we don't consciously think about, like heart rate, digestion, breathing.
Right, right.
So breathing through your right nostril tends to activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response. It makes you more alert.
And the left nostril?
That's connected to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is all about relaxation and slowing things down.
So, depending on which nostril is dominant, you might feel more energized or more relaxed.
Exactly. It's even linked to sleep cycles.
It's incredible how much is going on beneath the surface that we're totally unaware of.
Absolutely. And then Nestor goes on to talk about these tiny hair-like structures in our noses called cilia.
I vaguely remember those from biology class.
Yeah, but they're way more important than we might think. They act like this miniature cleaning crew, constantly moving mucus, which traps dust and germs away from the lungs.
So that's another reason why nasal breathing is better.
Exactly. Mouth breathing bypasses this whole intricate cleaning system.
Makes sense. So after the nose, Nestor gets into all these different breathing techniques.
Yeah.
Where does he start?
Well, he talks about this really interesting guy named Carl Stoof, who was a choir conductor, not a doctor.
Choir conductor.
Yeah. But Steph developed this method focused on completely emptying your lungs and then coordinating your breathing in a very specific way.
And that worked.
Apparently it did. He had success with opera singers, athletes, even people with emphysema.
Interesting. So he wasn't a medical professional, but he was still able to help people improve their breathing.
Exactly. It shows that there's a lot we can do to improve our breathing, even outside of traditional medicine.
Okay, what other techniques does he cover?
Well, there's the Buteyko method, which is kind of the opposite of what you'd expect.
What do you mean?
Instead of taking big, deep breaths, Buteyko focuses on breathing less.
Breathing less. That sounds counterintuitive.
It does, right. But the idea is to increase carbon dioxide levels in your body, which proponents believe can help with things like asthma and high blood pressure.
Interesting. So less breathing, more carbon dioxide, better health.
That's the basic premise. And it was initially pretty controversial, but has gained some acceptance, particularly in Russia.
Huh. Fascinating.
What else? Then there's slow breathing or coherent breathing, which is more about finding a natural rhythm.
What's the natural rhythm?
It's around 5.5 breaths per minute with equal inhales and exhales.
That's pretty slow.
It is. And there's evidence that this kind of slow, rhythmic breathing can calm your nervous system and reduce stress.
So it's like active relaxation.
You could say that. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, he talks about high-intensity breathing techniques.
Those are the ones that are kind of like hyperventilation.
Exactly. Yeah. Things like the Wim Hof method and holotropic breathwork. They involve breathing rapidly and deeply, which can temporarily put you in a state of stress and alter your consciousness.
Sounds intense.
It can be. Nestor talks about how Wim Hof can withstand extreme cold using these techniques, and there are studies to back it up.
Wow, that's wild.
It is. He also explores the reported benefits of holotropic breathwork for personal growth and even healing.
But there are risks, right?
So yeah, definitely. He emphasizes that these techniques should only be practiced with experienced guidance.
Makes sense. They're not something to just try on your own.
Definitely not.
So throughout the book, Nestor keeps coming back to this idea that carbon dioxide isn't just a waste product.
Right. He really challenges the common misconception that we should be getting rid of as much carbon dioxide as possible.
So what's the deal with carbon dioxide?
Well, he talks about these pioneers like Christian Bohr and Yandell Henderson, who did research way back in the early 1900s.
Okay.
Their work showed that carbon dioxide is actually crucial for delivering oxygen to our cells.
Right. Really?
Yeah. It also helps regulate blood pH and a bunch of other important bodily
So
functions.
carbon dioxide is actually good for us.
In the right amounts, absolutely. And this is where the problem of overbreathing comes in.
Overbreathing, like taking too many deep breaths.
Exactly. That can lead to a condition called hypocapnia, which means you have too little carbon dioxide in your blood.
And that's bad because,
Because it can actually reduce the amount of oxygen that gets delivered to your tissues.
whoa, that's so counterintuitive. You'd think breathing more would mean more oxygen.
No, it's weird. But it all comes down to the way carbon dioxide and oxygen interact in our blood.
Okay, starting to get it.
And then the book goes into this whole other area about how the shape of our mouths and jaws affects our breathing.
Oh yeah, this is where he talks about orthodontics and stuff.
Exactly. He explains how having a small mouth or a misaligned jaw can physically obstruct your airway, leading to things like snoring and sleep apnea.
So basically, the structure of our faces can impact how well we breathe.
Precisely. And he talks about how early orthodontists actually focused on widening the mouth to improve breathing.
Really?
Yeah. But then there's this guy, Dr. John Mew, who developed this controversial approach called orthotropics.
What's that all about?
Well, he basically argues that traditional orthodontics, with all the tooth extractions and braces, might actually be making our jaws smaller and our airways narrower.
That's interesting.
It is. And then he brings up Dr. Ted Belfour, who believes that chewing hard foods can actually stimulate bone growth in the skull.
So, chewing your food properly can help your jaw develop correctly.
That's the idea. Belfour even created a device called a POD that's designed to gently expand the upper jaw.
Wow, there's so much more to breathing than I ever realized.
I know, right? It's this whole hidden world that we don't even think about.
So after all that, what are some of the key takeaways from breath? What can people actually do to improve their breathing?
Well, the biggest one is to breathe through your nose as much as possible.
Okay, got it. Nose breathing is key. What else?
He also recommends eating foods that require more chewing to help develop and maintain a strong jaw.
So ditch the processed food and go for the crunchy stuff.
Exactly. And then he encourages readers to explore different breathing techniques and find what works best for them.
Like the Buteyko method, slow breathing, or even those high-intensity techniques if you're feeling adventurous.
Right. But with those, he really stresses the importance of proper guidance.
Definitely don't try that at home without an expert.
For sure.
Wow. Breath by James Nestor is really an eye-opener.
It is. It completely changes the way you think about something you do every second of every day.
What stood out to you the most from this summary and review?
I don't know. It's hard to pick just one thing, but the connection between breathing and so many aspects of health, even things like erectile dysfunction, was pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, that was a surprise for me too.
What about you? What resonated with you the most?
Honestly, the whole idea that we've lost this ancient art of breathing and that we can actually relearn it and improve our lives in so many ways.
It's pretty empowering, isn't it?
It is. It makes you realize that you have more control over your health than you might think. Well, if you enjoy this in-depth summary and review and want to discover more fascinating insights from the world of audiobooks, be sure to subscribe to Audiobook Quiver.
And give this video a like, follow our channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next engaging review and summary.
We'll be back soon with more captivating reads.